the inescapable reality of so-called renewables, or more properly understood, unreliables. They are intermittent producers of electricity, and they are doing that in an environment and with a system that needs to very tightly calibrate supply and demand and maintain it at this steady frequency. In the US, it's 60 hertz, 60 times a second. In Europe, it's 50. There's so many aspects of our electrified world that rely on this frequency. Everything in our lives relies on plugging this into that outlet and having it work. And the fact is, it is not as simple as we think, and it can all go dark a lot quicker than we realize. Solar and wind don't help you out. They give you the power when they're good and ready, when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining. And if not, too bad. Time to kick on those power plants that you have to maintain alongside them in order for any of this to even work at all. Energy is the fuel of everything. It's the fuel of life. It's the fuel of us. When we eat food, we measure it in calories. Calories are a measure of energy. That's what they are. A calorie is a measure of energy. And electricity, well, that's the food of the mechanized world that makes 8 billion people on the planet possible, and a middle-class life with actual healthcare and transportation and telecommunications and YouTube videos. All of that relies on electricity. Reliable, affordable electricity, energy. And when that becomes unreliable, bad things happen. We got an example of that in Spain.
Spain and Portugal ground to a halt on Monday after an Iberian Peninsula-wide blackout delivered a stark reminder of how dependent on power modern life is. Many large supermarkets and stores closed. Stores quickly ran out of basic provisions, with others facing losses from products unable to be refrigerated. Among the hardest hit were people dependent on home medical units with finite backup power supplies, and those using mobility devices such as wheelchairs. Solar generation, which accounted for the majority of Spain's electricity at the time, plunged by more than 50%. One industry source said there was not enough firm power like gas, nuclear, and hydro storage to handle the sudden fall.
So this is the question you have to ask yourself. Why, if you're so committed to eliminating fossil fuels, would there not be enough nuclear? Neighboring France powers itself by 60, 70% plus nuclear power. What was going on in Spain? Well, like California, Spain was pursuing anti-nuclear as a strategy for reasons that are baffling.
Spain has been aggressively phasing out nuclear power plants since 2019, planning to replace the 20% of electricity produced by nuclear with solar and wind energy. The Spanish government's decision closely aligns with progressive energy policies promoted across Europe, prioritizing immediate climate goals over grid reliability.
Frankly, no one understands this. Nobody understands how you could even connect shutting down nuclear plants with climate goals. Nuclear is the most dense, reliable, carbon-free power generation we have ever concocted. It suggests that maybe this isn't really about carbon, but let's stay on this, shall we? Even the New York Times has to admit that Spain's success in renewable energy may have left it vulnerable. Indeed, it appears to have done so. They have been going around blowing stuff up. This is what progress looks like in the progressive world of energy. Destroying reliable sources of energy to stand up unreliable sources. A couple of years ago, the same thing happened here in Texas. And the reasons why point back to what's happened in Spain and what might become a fixture of increasingly less modern life if we let progressives have their way.
In February 2021, a winter storm that swept through Texas caused one of the most severe power crises in American history. The cold weather created shockingly high electricity demands as people tried to keep their homes warm. But it also caused problems with the power supply, because power plants themselves and their supporting infrastructure weren't adequately protected against freezing weather. The result was that Texas couldn't generate enough power to meet demand. Instead, they would have to disconnect customers to reduce demands down to manageable levels. But before grid operators could shed enough load from the system, the frequency of the alternating current dropped as the remaining generators were bogged down, falling below 59.4 Hz for over 4 minutes.
This image right here, it doesn't immediately make any sense, right? What are we talking about? We're talking about this frequency. What is this frequency? This frequency ends up being really, really important because the way electricity is transported over space is over power lines, over high voltage power lines. What that means fundamentally is that in order to get that power at the power plant to our home, it has to go through something called a transformer. These are these massive, basically sets of coils that convert the electricity into high voltage power, the amplitude, if you will, of this frequency of the electrons. Voltage is what pushes the electrons through the system. It is like water pressure for energy, for electricity. And so if you want to move that electricity fast, you want to get it across the state of Texas or across the country, you need high voltage to do it. And it is operating at a consistent frequency. That frequency in the US is 60 Hertz. That's 60 times per second. We don't realize how important that number is, but it defines a lot of the way everything works. And you have to operate at that. It's like the heartbeat of the system. And you have to stay within this narrow range of just a 0.5 Hertz to keep everything working. And if you go outside of that, everything starts to break. And if those big transformers break, you could be without power for up to 6 months. And 6 months is enough time for the total collapse of a society. And here's the thing about that. Those giant transformers that every electrical grid on this planet relies on, we don't have a lot of extras of those things. In fact, it's not clear to me that we could build them here in the US if we needed more. And so this is where the hardening of the grid and protecting the critical infrastructure of our society really comes into play. You want to talk about a crisis? That is a pending crisis. A sunspot can take our society down, and it is because of this graph, because of the requirements of this magical thing we have to operate at the steady 60 Hertz.
It might not seem like much, but that is a critical threshold in grid operations. It's 1% below nominal. Power plants have relays that keep track of grid frequency and disconnect equipment if anything goes awry to prevent serious damage. If the grid frequency drops below 59.4 Hz, the clock starts ticking. And if it doesn't return to the nominal frequency within 9 minutes, the relays trip. That means the Texas grid came within a bathroom break from total collapse.
Let's take a step back and really help, just because this is so important. I want to play an extended clip from this great video by Wendover Productions, and we'll put a link to it over at dadsavesamerica.com that explains the way all of this works at the big picture scale so you can really understand what's going on.
A fraction of a second ago, the electricity powering your lights, your air conditioning, your television, your refrigerator, nearly everything electric around you right now was water, gas, wind, or some other form of energy, potentially hundreds or thousands of miles away. If you flip a light switch in Los Angeles, that could cause a turbine in Washington to start spinning. Electric grids are considered some of the single largest machines in existence. They stretch across entire continents.
And that's important. They really are a single machine. They are working in harmony at that 60 Hertz. They're not merely a distributed network. They are connected. If you want to plug into the grid, you are plugging in to an engineered single system.
But they're machines with absolutely zero slack. With water systems, for example, there's some extra supply in a storage reservoir at the treatment plant and some extra supply in the pipes connecting the treatment plant to your home. Supply only has to roughly match demand, but that's not the case with electricity. Your lights, your TV, your microwave, everything plugged into the grid uses electricity produced just moments ago. When forecasting demand, utilities need to factor in the hour, day, season, location, and plenty more.
There's a scene from one of my favorite movies, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation with Chevy Chase, where he, bam, turns on this grid of Christmas lights that he'd been working on half the movie, and the thing finally kicks on, and you see they have to click on an extra power generator to just support the rest of the city. That's what's going on. It is real time, delivered at the moment of need. It is crazy.
Now, with whatever demand materializes, utilities then need to essentially instantly match supply. To do this, they layer different energy sources on top of each other. Often, the lowest layer is nuclear power. Nuclear power stations aren't designed to be able to turn off and on easily. It would take the better part of a day to shut down and start up again, so it's rather impractical to operate these in response to demand. In addition, considering how massively expensive their construction is, it would be economically inefficient to let these stations run idle.
One other thing on that is a huge reason why nuclear power plants are so expensive to build is federal regulations. We have known how to do this technology for over 50 years. It works. It powers most of France. Our federal government has made it functionally impossible to build new ones. Let's not misunderstand the source of the cost when it comes to nuclear.
Therefore, they'll run nearly continuously for the entirety of their service lives, except for during planned maintenance. This means they provide the most stable supply of electricity 24/7. Colorado no longer operates any nuclear power plants, but it does have 6 of the next layer: coal power stations. Like nuclear, most of these coal plants cannot be fired up quickly, as they take some time to get up to temperature, so utilities will also run them essentially continuously. Coal and nuclear combined typically fulfill what's called the baseload. Their continuous production essentially equals the valley of demand. They'll make the minimum amount of power needed at a point in the day.
And you would think that if your concern was to maintain human flourishing and civil society and the functioning of hospitals and schools and transportation and life, if you don't like coal, dirty coal, replace the orange with the red. Replace coal with more nuclear. Virtually nobody that claims to care about climate says that. Virtually nobody. And certainly none of the governments around the world, including all of Europe and Canada and all the rest.
So then, on top of that, utilities need production methods that can fire up and shut down far faster. They need to be able to produce the power to operate all those AC units in hot summer afternoons. The bulk of this job is completed by natural gas-fired plants. Of the 25 in Colorado, 13 of these stations generate using a simple cycle combustion turbine. This is the simplest means of turning natural gas into electricity. Much like a jet engine, the fuel is used to turn a turbine, which turns a generator, which produces electricity.
Now look at that turbine. It is 3 people tall, and there's just thousands of these throughout the energy system. Nuclear plants, coal plants, natural gas plants, they all rely on turbines. They all take combustion or heat and turn it into movement that then produces electricity through electromagnetic action. That's what's going on. The nuclear plants don't just produce energy by virtue of the atoms colliding. They produce heat that then moves turbines that then produces the electricity through the turbines and the coils of wires that then move electrons. That's technically how the electricity actually happens.
More advanced natural gas power plants recover the hot exhaust to convert it into electricity too, but the startup process for these takes longer, so simple cycle stations are used for applications where speed is key. Most can reach full power within 15 minutes, making them an effective tool to respond to those short peaks in demand. Nuclear, coal, and natural gas are some of the more traditional means of generating electricity.
Traditional and reliable means of generating electricity.
Recent proliferation of renewable energy sources, though, has kickstarted a reinvention of this system of base load and peaker plants. That's because when wind and solar generating stations can make power, that power is essentially free, meaning there's essentially no additional variable cost to generate power once the panels or turbines are installed. That's not the case with natural gas-fired plants, for example, as the gas itself represents one of their primary costs. So this essentially creates a new bottom layer to the energy mix, but it's a bottom layer that's uncontrollably variable. One sunny, windy day could mean that a state has an excess of electricity when added to its baseload sources, while one cloudy, windless day could mean that the peaker plants have to operate at full force. Solar and onshore wind power are now some of the cheapest sources of electricity, but because they rely on natural phenomena, they can't match supply to demand the way that the traditional nuclear, coal, natural gas trifecta can.
And this right here, the cheapest. You will find this everywhere you look. I've spent all day looking at different videos across the political spectrum, people who are super pumped about all of this stuff. It's only cheap at that margin, at that moment, having already built these massively expensive wind farms and solar facilities covering vast swaths of land, far more land. They are the biggest consumers of land for any energy producing source. Nuclear can produce many times more energy on a tiny fraction of the land that solar especially, and wind consume. So even from an environmental impact standpoint, as far as disrupting natural spaces, it's not even remotely clear to me that these are a net positive on that ground. You have to cover massive swaths of land for this temporary power to work. Michael Schellenberger over at Public, friend of the show, great guy. He's been covering this fantastically. He had this to write. In a traditional power grid dominated by heavy spinning machines, coal plants, gas turbines, nuclear reactors, small disturbances, even from severe weather, are absorbed and smoothed out by the sheer physical inertia of the system. The heavy rotating mass of the generators, those turbines, act like shock absorbers, resisting rapid changes in frequency and stabilizing the grid. But in an electricity system dominated by solar panels, wind turbines, and inverters, these are these power converters that are solid state that are used in this more recent and more unreliable technology, there is almost no physical inertia. Those giant spinning turbines, think of it like going to the carnival and getting on one of those little spinny things that you pull. What are those things called? Like the tea. It's like the teacup. You know, you go to the Jersey Shore, you go on the boardwalk, you take your kids on. I'll try to pull up a clip that is ridiculous of me and my son and my nephew pulling this thing. Once you get it up and running, you're spinning fast. That's inertia. That is your potential energy converted into movement. And then if you let go, it'll keep spinning for a good long time. That's the inertia in the system. The entire electricity system has been predicated on all of the sources of energy having large physical moving bodies that store energy in their movement. It is a kind of movement battery source, and it buffers the disruptions, makes it stable, makes it so life goes on, makes it so your preemies incubator doesn't shut off in the middle of the night. Most modern wind turbines are electronically decoupled from the grid and provide little stabilizing force. Inverter-based systems, which dominate modern renewable energy grids, are precise but delicate. They follow the frequency of the grid rather than resisting sudden changes, meaning as things collapse, they collapse along with it. The reality of how cheap these energy sources are. They're not cheap. They're cheap in the most narrowly engineering, utopian way possible. There's a thing about reality that I think we as adults need to grapple with, and that is that reality is actually messy. It never goes according to plan. So there's parts of life that feel like a pure cost and in fact are a pure cost, like your homeowner's insurance or your car insurance. You don't want to have to pay that money. It'd be cheaper to drive if you didn't need to pay for insurance. And most of the time you don't need it. You're driving along, you're not crashing into anybody, it's going fine. But that redundancy, that buffer, is what keeps you from having catastrophic cost. And that's what the wind and solar is already cheaper people fail to admit. The unreliability of these systems, the fact that they make everything so fragile, means that you go from a little bit of extra cost and in redundancy and energy loss, as each stage of energy production takes place. From a pure physics perspective, a pure electric system is actually more efficient. Electric cars lose less of their energy to heat, for example, than internal combustion engines. So there's a kind of like high school physics class level efficiency that our glorious green future pretends it's going to provide. But it is swamped by your entire country going dark for a couple days and potentially tens of thousands of people dying. Not to mention the economic destruction that happens when that takes place. That is the thing that gets missed. Whenever you hear renewables are cheaper, know that they're lying to you. They are leaving all these costs that they impose on the future and on the rest of us out of their math. But alas, that doesn't matter for the global elite.
The solutions are way more available than people realize. We have alternative. It's a fossil fuel crisis, 80% of it. And yet the fossil fuel lobby blocks any practical solutions, and they're there. Solar electricity and wind electricity, batteries and EVs, that stuff is way cheaper now than the fossil fuel version. And it creates more jobs, it's cleaner, we can save the future, we can give young people hope.
This is the progressive green vision.
5 years ago, we introduced a vision for social and ecological transformation big enough to save our planet, the Green New Deal. The critics jumped against it immediately. They said it was an impossible dream, too impractical, not serious enough, and they were wrong. In the last 5 years, we have made major strides in tackling the climate crisis and creating millions of jobs by building together a diverse coalition of people committed to a better future.
You got that? What's been built so far? A diverse coalition of, of this.
From community organizers and frontline climate advocates to labor organizers and everyday working people, we are winning with a movement that rejects the dystopian future and is committed to building a new one.
Notice that rejects the dystopian future wearing the Green New Deal mask on the cover of The Guardian. But I think there were some of us that understood what was going on all the way back in 1970.
Some quarters saw more than coincidence in the fact that Earth Day occurred on the 100th anniversary of the birth of Lenin, the father of Soviet communism. A high school in Boca Raton, Florida, postponed its activities until tomorrow. And the Comptroller General of Georgia, James Bentley, sent out $1,600 worth of telegrams warning that Earth Day might be a communist plot.
Earth Day might be a communist plot. If you like this clip, you should check out the full video and all the other great content we've got at Dad Saves America. So be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that bell so you won't miss our new stuff as it drops each week.